The notary's stamp came down on the page with a sound like a gavel, and that's when I knew my life was over for the second time. I was sitting in a leasing office in St. Paul, Minnesota, on a Tuesday morning in February, signing away the last thing I owned that meant anything. My grandmother's house, the little blue Craftsman on Hague Avenue with the porch swing my grandfather built in 1962. The bank had been patient for 14 months. They were not patient anymore. The woman across the desk slid the papers toward me with the kind of soft pity that makes you want to throw up, and I signed my name 3 times in blue ink. And then I walked out into a parking lot full of dirty snow with nothing but a duffel bag and a manila folder of documents and $97 in my checking account. I was 31 years old. I had a master's degree in social work. I had spent 8 years taking care of a woman who turned out to share none of my blood. And I had nowhere to go. My stepfather's voice was already in my head before I even started the car. You were always going to end up like this. Your mother begged me to take you in. She begged me, and look at the thanks I got. He'd said that to me the day after my mother's funeral. I was 23. He'd had the locks changed by the time I came home from the cemetery. But the grandmother whose house I'd just lost, she was his mother. And she had loved me. That part I knew. That part I still know. The rest, it turned out, was a lie so big I had been walking around inside it for 31 years and never once seen the walls. I drove to a Motel 6 off I-94 and paid for 2 nights and ate a granola bar for dinner and stared at the ceiling fan until I fell asleep. In the morning I drove to the downtown post office to renew my passport. It was the last thing on a list my caseworker friend had made me. Renew your ID. Renew your passport. Apply for emergency assistance. Don't give up. I had a vague, half-formed plan about going to stay with a college roommate in Portland. I just needed a full row and a stamp and a future, in that order. The woman behind the counter was named Doreen. I remember because I read it off her name tag while she typed. She was maybe 60, with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she had the kindest voice, that flat, warm Minnesota lilt. And she asked me how my morning was, and I lied and said fine. She took my old passport. She took my birth certificate. She took my social security card. She typed for a while, and then she typed for a little longer, and then she stopped typing. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She looked at the screen. She looked at me. She looked at the screen again. "One moment, hon," she said. "I just need to grab my supervisor. I didn't think anything of it. I thought my paperwork was incomplete. I thought I'd brought the wrong utility bill." I started rummaging in my folder for the lease termination notice, thinking maybe she needed proof of address. Doreen walked to the back of the office. She walked very slowly, and as she walked, her right hand drifted down to a small black button on the underside of the counter. I saw her press it. She didn't look at me when she did. She just kept walking, very calmly, like she was going to refill her coffee. 40 seconds later, 2 uniformed officers from the Postal Inspection Service came through the side door, not running, just walking. Hands not on their weapons but near them. One of them stood by the front entrance. The other one came up to me at the counter and said, very quietly, "Ma'am, would you mind stepping over here with me, please?" There were maybe 9 other people in the post office that morning. I felt every one of them turn to look at me. A man in a UPS jacket, a mother with a stroller, an older couple holding a package, their eyes on the back of my neck like a heat lamp. "Did I do something?" I asked. My voice came out very small. "We just need to verify some information," the officer said. "Please step over here." They walked me to a side office. They closed the door. They did not handcuff me, but they stood between me and the door. The older officer, his name tag said Inspector Pham, sat down across from me and folded his hands. "Ma'am," he said, "the social security number on your application is flagged in our federal database. It belongs to a child who was reported deceased in October of 1993 in Duluth, Minnesota. A 2-year-old named Lillian Cassidy Brennan. Can you tell me how you came to be using this number?" I want you to imagine what that sentence sounds like. I want you to imagine sitting in a fluorescent-lit office on a Wednesday morning, having signed away your grandmother's house 22 hours earlier, having eaten a granola bar for dinner, having $97 to your name, and a federal inspector tells you in a perfectly calm voice that the 9 digits you have used your entire life to file taxes, to apply for college, to get your driver's license, to bury your mother, belong to a baby girl who died before you were born. I started laughing. I couldn't stop. It wasn't funny. It was the sound your body makes when there's no other sound to make. That's my number, I said. That's been my number since I was a baby. I have a card. I have it right there. You have it right there in your hand. Ma'am, when were you born? March 14th, 1994. And where were you born? Bismarck, North Dakota. He wrote it down. He nodded slowly. And the child whose number this is, he said, was born in November of 1991. In Duluth, and died, according to the death certificate on file, in October of 1993. Then it's a coincidence, I said. It's a mistake. Some clerical thing. People reuse numbers, don't they? No, ma'am, he said. They don't. The other officer was on a phone in the corner, speaking very low. I heard the words federal and bureau and please hold. Inspector Pham just sat across from me, his hands folded, his face neither kind nor unkind, just waiting. The fluorescent light above us buzzed. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I want to tell you something honest. In that moment sitting in that office, what I felt was not fear. It wasn't even confusion. What I felt, and I'm ashamed of this, was a tiny, terrible, hopeful flutter underneath my ribs, because for the first time in my entire life, someone was looking at me and saying you are not who you thought you were. And some buried part of me, some part that had been crouching in the dark since I was small, sat up and said finally, you don't know what it is to grow up the way I grew up unless you've grown up that way. To be called that girl by the man who raised you. To be reminded at every birthday that you cost money. To find out at 15 that the man you call dad is actually your stepfather, that your real father died before you were born, that your mother had simply remarried when you were 8 months old and you'd never been told because what would be the point? You were going to call him dad anyway. To watch your mother shrink under his thumb for 2 decades and die at 51 of a cancer she didn't get treated soon enough because there were always bills. To bury her and come home to find your suitcase on the porch and the locks changed. To be told in the only voicemail he ever left you afterward, I did your mother a favor for 23 years. The favor is done. So when Inspector Pham told me my social security number belonged to a dead child, some quiet thing in me thought, of course it does. Of course I was never really anyone. A woman in a charcoal suit arrived 40 minutes later. She had short silver hair and a federal badge and a leather portfolio under her arm. And when she walked into the room, she looked at me and stopped walking. She just stopped. Right there in the doorway, Inspector Pham said, "This is Special Agent Holloway from the FBI's Minneapolis field office. She specializes in—" But Agent Holloway wasn't listening. She was looking at my face. The way a person looks at something they have seen before in a dream. She walked to the chair across from me and she did not sit down. She set her portfolio on the table. She opened it. She turned it around so I could see. Inside was a photograph. A baby in a yellow knit dress sitting in a high chair laughing. Maybe 18 months old, round cheeks, a tuft of dark hair. And on her left eyebrow near the outer edge, exactly where mine is, the one I have looked at in the mirror every day of my life, a small white scar in the shape of a comma. Agent Holloway said, "Lillian, honey, where have you been?" That's when I started shaking. Not crying, shaking. The kind of shaking that comes up from your feet and takes over your hands and your jaw and your teeth. And I couldn't hold the photograph because my hands wouldn't close. And Agent Holloway came around the table and knelt down beside me, and she didn't touch me, but she said very softly, "It's okay, sweetheart, it's okay, you're safe. You're safe now. I have been looking for you for 32 years. I want to tell you what they told me over the next 6 hours. In November of 1991, in Duluth, a couple named David and Margaret Brennan had a baby girl. He was a corporate attorney. She was an emergency room physician. They were both 34. Their daughter Lillian was an only child born after 7 years of fertility treatments, and she was the center of their world. In October of 1993, when Lillian was almost 2, the Brennans hired a nanny. The nanny came with a forged set of references from a forged agency. She worked for them for 6 weeks. And then, on a Saturday morning in late October, while David Brennan was out of town at a deposition in Chicago, and Margaret was working a 24-hour shift at Singapore, Luke's, the nanny, put Lillian in the car for what she said would be a trip to the park. She never came back. 6 hours later, a car was found burned on a logging road outside Two Harbors. Inside, there was a child car purse. Inside, there was a child car seat, partially melted. There were traces of accelerant. There was a small piece of fabric from the yellow knit dress Lillian had been wearing that morning, caught on a piece of twisted metal under the seat. There were no remains. The fire had been hot enough, the investigator said, to leave nothing. The nanny disappeared. For a few weeks the case was a national story. Then it wasn't. The Brennans buried an empty casket. They stayed married for 11 more years, and then they got divorced because grief makes a marriage into a haunted house. David Brennan moved to Boston and remarried and had 2 sons. Margaret Brennan never remarried. She founded a non-profit for missing children. She kept Lillian's room exactly the way it was the morning the nanny drove away with her. And every November, on Lillian's birthday, she lit a candle and put it in the window. The nanny's real name was not the name on her references. Her real name was Coraline Vance. She was 32 years old in 1993. She had been raised in a Pentecostal compound in northern Idaho that the federal government had broken up in 1988. She had no birth certificate of her own that anyone could find. She had a sister in Bismarck, North Dakota, named Joelle. In April of 1994, 5 months after the burned car was found, a woman calling herself Joelle Vance walked into the Bismarck DMV with a baby girl on her hip and a death certificate for a child named Lillian Brennan that she said was her own niece. She used that death certificate in a way I still don't fully understand even now, to obtain a delayed birth registration for the child she was carrying. She named the baby. She got the baby a social security number, the bureaucratic record assumed, because the death record was from another state and the systems didn't talk to each other in 1994. That the death certificate she was presenting was simply proof of a deceased sibling. The forms were stamped. The number was issued. The baby became on paper a person. That baby was me. Coraline Vance, the nanny, was my biological aunt. Joelle Vance, the woman I had called Mom for my entire life until she died, was Coraline's younger sister. My mother had not stolen me. That part the FBI was very clear about, and I am grateful. Because if I had had to learn that about her, I don't know what I would have done. My mother had been told by Coraline that I was Coraline's own child, born out of wedlock to a man who didn't want anything to do with us. And Coraline had begged my mother to take me because she couldn't keep me, and my mother, 26 years old, recently widowed, lonely, unable to have children of her own, had said yes. My mother had loved me. She had loved me my whole life, and she had not known. Coraline disappeared again after the handoff. The FBI lost her trail in 1995 in eastern Oregon. They didn't know, when Agent Holloway walked into that post office that morning, whether she was alive or dead. My mother married my stepfather in 1995. I was a little over a year old. He was 29 and recently divorced, and he didn't like children. He married my mother because she was beautiful and tired and didn't ask for much, and he tolerated me because she came with me. He never adopted me. He never adopted me. He never tried. Agent Holloway told me all of this in the conference room at the Federal Building in downtown Minneapolis, with a cup of bad coffee in front of me and a box of tissues on the table, and a victim advocate sitting on my left, and the afternoon sun coming through the blinds in stripes across the carpet. She told it slowly. She let me ask questions. She let me cry. She let me sit silent for 10 minutes when I needed to. At the end of it, she said, "Your biological mother is alive. She lives in St. Paul. She has lived in St. Paul. She has lived in St. Paul for 26 years because this is the city where she has always believed you might be." She paused. She is 1 mile from us right now. Would you like to call her? I want to tell you about the phone call, but I can't. I won't? Some things belong to me. I will tell you that she answered on the second ring. I will tell you that when I said her name, Margaret, and then said I think I might be your daughter, there was a sound on the other end of the line that I will hear in my chest for the rest of my life. I will tell you that an hour later, she walked into the federal building wearing a navy blue coat and snow on her shoulders, and she stopped in the doorway exactly the way Agent Holloway had stopped, and she put both hands over her mouth, and she said, "Oh, just oh." And then she said, "Your eyebrow." That was the first thing she said to me. Your eyebrow. Because she remembered the scar. Because I had fallen off a kitchen chair when I was 14 months old, and she had taken me to her own emergency room and stitched it herself. She remembered every stitch. We sat in that conference room for 4 hours. I learned my middle name was Cassidy. I learned I had been born at 4:17 in the morning, in a snowstorm, and that my father had cried so hard the nurses had brought him a chair. I learned that my father, David, was still alive in Boston, and that he had been calling every few months for 32 years to ask if there was any news, and that he was on a plane already, that Agent Holloway had called him before she ever walked into the post office, because she had seen my photograph come up in the system that morning and known the way you know a face in a dream. And then, just when the room had become small and warm and survivable, my phone rang. It was my stepfather. I had not spoken to him in 8 years. I didn't know how he had my number. He had blocked me on everything after the funeral. But there his name was, lighting up the screen on the conference table, and I looked at Agent Holloway, and she looked at the phone, and she said very carefully, "Do you want to answer that?" I answered, "You little bitch." He said, "No hello. You little ungrateful bitch. I just got a call from a federal agent asking me about your mother, asking me what I knew, asking me where Caroline is. What did you tell them? What did you tell them?" His voice was shaking, not with fear, with fury, the same fury I had heard through bedroom walls my entire childhood. I said, "How did you know to call Coraline by her real name?" The line went silent. I had not said the name Coraline. I had not even said the word aunt. I had not told him a single thing about what had happened that morning, and he had used her real name. Agent Holloway was already writing on a notepad and sliding it across the table to me. "Keep him talking. You knew," I said. "You knew the whole time. You don't know what you're talking about. You knew. You married my mother knowing she had taken someone else's child. Oh my God. The money. There was money, wasn't there? I want to tell you what I figured out in the next 60 seconds, sitting in that conference room with a federal agent across from me and my biological mother holding my left hand under the table. My stepfather's name is Hollis Whitcomb. He is 61 years old. He worked as a regional sales manager for an agricultural equipment company in Fargo. In 1995, when he married my mother, he had been recently divorced. What I had never asked, what I had never thought to ask, was where his first wife had gone. I had grown up assuming she had left him. Now, sitting in that conference room, I understood that his first wife had been Coraline Vance, my biological aunt, the nanny, the woman who had walked out of the Brennan's house with me on her hip. Hollis Whitcomb had been married to the woman who kidnapped me. He had been her husband when she walked into that house in Duluth with forged references. He had been her husband when she lit a stolen car on fire on a logging road. He had divorced her in early 1994, quickly, quietly, and married my mother 15 months later, after the trail had gone cold and the case had gone cold and Coraline had disappeared into the western states. He had collected ransom money that was never paid, because the Brennans had been ready to pay, but the nanny had never called. He had collected something else. I learned this later, from the prosecutors, which was a series of small wire transfers from an offshore account that had been set up in Coraline's name in 1996, and drained into his over the following 20 years. He had been spending blood money on his pickup trucks and his hunting trips and his second mortgage for 30 years. While I slept on a twin bed in a back room, while I worked 2 jobs through high school, while my mother died because she couldn't afford the scan, He had known. He had known every time he looked at me. He had hated me because every time he looked at me he saw a crime he was profiting from. He had hated me because I was evidence. He hated me because I was evidence. I said it out loud in that conference room after I hung up the phone. I said it to the agent and to the woman who was my mother and to the victim advocate and to the empty cup of coffee in front of me. I said it like I was naming a thing for the first time, because I was. He had hated me because I was evidence. Agent Holloway was already on her feet. What happened next happened very fast, and I will tell it fast. Hollis Whitcomb got in his truck in Fargo and started driving east on I-94 toward Minneapolis with a Ruger in his glove box and a story he had been preparing for 30 years. He thought he could get to me before I gave a statement. He thought he could explain. He thought he could threaten. I don't know exactly what he thought because he never got the chance to say. The Minnesota State Patrol pulled him over outside Alexandria at 9:42 that night on a federal warrant, with a Ruger in his glove box and 4 burner phones on the passenger seat and a bank statement in his jacket pocket, showing a wire transfer of $41,000 he had attempted to send to a numbered account in the Cayman Islands at 3:15 that afternoon, 20 minutes after my phone call. The Cayman account was traced. Inside it, the FBI found 3 decades of receipts. They found my mother's name on none of them. They found Hollis's name on most of them. They found, eventually, in a deposit box he had in Bismarck, a passport in the name of a woman named Coraline, who had been living in Spokane, Washington, under a different name since 2003 and dying of pancreatic cancer in the hospice as of 3 weeks before any of this happened. He had been wiring her money the whole time. He had been keeping her quiet. She gave a deathbed statement. She was lucid for 2 days. She told them everything. She told them about the references. She told them about the burned car. She told them about her sister Joel, my mother, who she swore had never known the truth, who she had used like she used everyone. And she asked, this is in the transcript, I have read it. She asked if there was any chance the daughter she had given to her sister was still alive. They told her yes. She died the next morning. I will tell you about the lawyer, because the comments on this kind of story always ask about the lawyer. His name was a man my biological father brought in from Boston, a litigator in his 60s who had been the federal prosecutor for 20 years before he went private. He sat across from me in a conference room in March, 6 weeks after the post office, and he explained to me 3 things. The first thing was that the federal statute of limitations on kidnapping does not apply when the victim is a child. The clock does not run while the crime is ongoing, and the crime, in the eyes of the law, was ongoing every single day that I lived under a false identity. Hollis Whitcomb was going to be charged with conspiracy to commit kidnapping, conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation, wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion on roughly $2.4 million of unreported income over 30 years, and, because of the Ruger and his trip down I-94 with my address in his GPS, attempted kidnapping and conspiracy to commit murder. The second thing was about the money. Hollis had not earned the money. Hollis had received the money in exchange for his role in concealing a federal crime. Under a doctrine called constructive trust, the lawyer explained, the law treats a person who acquires property through wrongdoing as a trustee, holding that property on behalf of the rightful owner. Every dollar he had ever spent, the trucks, the boats, the hunting cabin in northern Wisconsin, the house in Fargo, the IRA, the pickup he was driving when they pulled him over. Every dollar of it was, in the eyes of the law, mine. Or rather, the Brennans. Or rather, mine again, because I was the Brennans. The third thing was that my biological parents had set up a trust in my name in 1994 and had been funding it for 32 years in the hope that I would come back. It was not small. It was not small in a way I am still learning to live with. I told the lawyer I didn't want the money from Hollis. I told him I didn't want a single dollar of it. I wanted the IRS to take it. I wanted the federal government to take it. I wanted it to go to the non-profit my mother had built to look for children like me. The lawyer nodded slowly. He said, "It's already drafted that way. Your mother asked us last week." I have been Lillian Cassidy Brennan for about a year now. I still answer to the old name when I'm tired. Sometimes I sign it on a check before I catch myself. I have 2 driver's licenses in a drawer at home, the old one and the new one. And I can't bring myself to throw the old one away because that girl was real too. She was raised in a back bedroom in Fargo by a tired woman who loved her. She made it. She got herself through college. She survived. I'm not going to pretend she didn't exist just because she had the wrong name. My father, David, flew in the night of the post office, and we have had dinner together every Sunday since. He cries every time. He doesn't try to hide it, and I don't try to make him stop. He is 66. He has 2 sons in Boston who are my half-brothers, and they are 19 and 17, and they are kind to me in a way I did not know. Boys that age could be kind. The younger one asked me the first time we met if I liked the same music he liked. I did not. We listened to his music anyway. He is teaching me, my mother, Margaret, and I have moved in together for now. In the house she has kept exactly the way it was. We have not touched Lillian's room. We are going to one day when I am ready. The yellow knit dress is in a cedar chest. I have held it. It is very small. I cannot believe I was ever that small. Hollis Whitcomb is in federal custody in Minnesota awaiting trial. His preliminary hearing is in May. The prosecutor tells me there will be no plea deal because Hollis will not stop talking, and every time he talks he digs himself deeper. And the U.S. attorney has decided to let him. He will spend the rest of his life in federal prison. He is 61. The federal sentencing guidelines for what he has done add up to 94 years. He will not see daylight again. I will sit in that courtroom every day of the trial. I will wear my mother's pearls. I will look at him until he looks at me, and then I will not look away. I have thought a great deal this past year about what I owe the woman who raised me, the woman I called Mom. She is the only mother I had until I was 31. She loved me with everything she had, and she was lied to by her own sister, and she died not knowing. I cannot be angry at her. I have tried. I cannot do it. What I can be angry at is the man who watched her work 2 jobs and skip her own doctor's appointments and die at 51 with $11,000 in medical debt, while he had $2 million in a Cayman account that he had collected for the crime of stealing her child. I can be angry at him for the rest of my life, and it will not be enough. But I have decided, and I want to say this part out loud because I think it matters. I have decided that I am not going to spend my life angry. I spent 31 years being told I was a burden. I am not going to spend the next 31 years being told I am a victim. I'm going to spend them being Lillian Cassidy Brennan, social worker, daughter of Margaret and David, daughter also of Joelle, sister of 2 boys in Boston, and a woman who walked into a post office on a Wednesday morning with $97 in her checking account and walked out, eventually, into a life she did not know was waiting for her. The little blue Craftsman on Hague Avenue, my grandmother's house. The one I signed away the day before. My mother bought it back. She bought it back in cash 2 weeks after I came home, and she put the deed in my name and she gave me the keys in a small velvet box on a Sunday afternoon in March. I sat on the porch swing my grandfather built in 1962. I sat there for a long time. The snow was melting. A cardinal landed on the railing. I thought about the woman who had loved me without knowing, and the woman who had looked for me without stopping, and the man who had hated me because I was evidence, and I thought, he was wrong about what I was evidence of. I was evidence that love does not need blood to be real. I was evidence that a mother can find her daughter across 32 years of silence. I was evidence that the truth is patient. It does not forget. It does not give up. It waits in a federal database in a quiet little post office in St. Paul, Minnesota, for a tired woman to come in on a Wednesday morning and lay her papers on the counter. And when she does, it stands up, and it says her name. I think about that Wednesday morning in the St. Paul post office almost every day now, and what I keep coming back to is how small the moment was before it became enormous. A clerk named Doreen typed 9 digits into a keyboard. Her finger drifted to a button. That was all. The rest of my life turned on a hand drifting 6 inches in a fluorescent lit room. I have learned something this past year that I want to say plainly, because I think it would have saved me 20 years of believing I was less than I was. Every cruelty in my life, every single one, had a reason behind it that was not about me. Hollis Whitcomb did not hate me because I was difficult or expensive or unwanted. He hated me because I was a living document of a crime he had been profiting from since before I could walk. His cruelty was not a verdict on my worth. It was a confession of his guilt. And I spent 31 years reading his confession as if it were my report card. I want you to think about whose voice is in your head when you fail, whose voice is in your head when you're tired or scared or alone in a Motel 6 with $97 in your account. If that voice belongs to someone who never loved you cleanly, you owe it nothing. You do not owe it your obedience. You do not owe it your obedience. You do not owe it your shame. You do not even owe it the dignity of a response. You can simply, quietly set it down. The other thing I have learned is that the truth is not in a hurry. It took 32 years for my name to come back to me. It took 32 years for the database to catch up to the crime. My biological mother lit a candle in her window every November for 3 decades because she believed something I could not have believed for her. That patience, that refusal to accept the easy ending. That is what brought me home. Not coincidence, not luck. Her stubbornness against all evidence that the truth was still out there waiting. So if you are in the middle of something right now that does not make sense, something that feels unjust, something you cannot prove and no one will believe, keep your records. Keep your receipts. Keep walking into post offices and DMVs and courtrooms. The systems are slow, but they are not asleep. Caroline Vance died of pancreatic cancer in a hospice in Spokane, while her sister's stolen daughter signed away a house in Minnesota, and a federal database in Virginia matched them across 32 years on a Tuesday afternoon. The truth was working the whole time. I just couldn't see it yet. I am Lillian Cassidy Brennan now. I am a daughter twice over. I am a sister. I am a woman who sat on her grandfather's porch swing on a Sunday afternoon in March and watched the snow melt. And I am not a burden. I never was. I was evidence. And the world is finally reading me correctly.